Good afternoon. My name is Shannon Sproul, and I am the founder of Parents Pushing Past Their Grief. This is an online community designed for parents that have lost a child, and it's a place for us to come together and work through our grief, cry, laugh, but most of all, to celebrate our children that have gone on. I am totally excited today to have with me Janine Alvarez. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. I'm going to read her bio, but I just want you to know that my son passed away in 2013. And when I look at the good that came out of it, I know that sounds, how could you find good in that? I look at all of the relationships that I've built, and Janine was one of those relationships. And I'm so thankful to know her and her husband. As a pastor, speaker, and licensed therapist, Janine Alvarez is the founder of Healing Waters. This is an online and in person community which provides support, coaching, and consultation services. Janine Alvarez holds a Master's of Art in Clinical Mental Health Counseling and is a professionally licensed mental health therapist specializing in co occurring disorders and trauma. Janine Alvarez serves as the First Lady of Cathedral at the Gathering Place in Rochester, New York, alongside her husband of 20 years, the Right Reverend Dr. Emilio Alvarez. Together, they have three beautiful children: Eli, 20, Cece, 18, and Lucas, 14. Thank you and welcome. Now, I've read your bio, so I want to give you a second. If there's anything you want to add to that and tell the audience anything about yourself, have at it.
All right. Well, first and foremost, Shannon, again, thank you so much for this opportunity. I understand that this is something that is needed, this type of community. And I remember when you were beginning all this,
Yeah.
Shortly after Brian's death, where you were like, wait, there's nothing here. There's nothing here to help me. There's nothing here that I can engage in. What's going on?
Yeah.
And it's like you just put your passion and purpose, boom, right to work.
Thank you.
I remember it was over at the was it the Emsley YMCA?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember going there for your first support group.
Yes.
And to see all this and how you flourished and how you're helping so many people, it has just been an absolute joy to my heart. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Pretty much my bio sums it up. I'm not a horribly complicated person. Pastor therapist. I currently run a mental health department program here in Rochester for a major non-for-profit agency, which provides transitional apartments and living environments for people who are in recovery from either severe and persistent mental health disorders or co-occurring disorders, mental health and substance abuse. I'm a wife. I'm a mother. I'm a woman.
And a beautiful one at that.
I just try to keep it simple, to keep it simple. You start to get all the weird titles and stuff.
Yeah. But I tell you, I truly appreciate you. You have just been a joy. We don't see each other often, but when we do communicate, it's always wonderful to talk to you. And thank you for taking the time out today. We're going to talk about something that's extremely important during the grieving process, and that's taking care of yourself. I think that so many of us get lost in the grieving process and worrying about our families, especially as women. I'm speaking about women now, trying to hold the family together, trying to be strong. We forget about ourselves. And I wanted to dive into that because with working with the support group, I've had a chance to meet all type of women and see how everyone grieves differently. And I personally, I'm not a licensed clinician in any kind of way, but I can pick up on things where, are you really taking care of you? And that's what I want to talk to you. Let's have a conversation today about taking care of yourself. So we're going to jump right into this. And I'm going to throw a first question at you. What are some of the signs that you're not taking care of yourself during the grieving process?
Yes. So I kind of wanted to expound on this particular question a little bit more because I think it's important to understand that grieving is natural.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you experience loss, whether it's death, whether it's divorce, whether it's job loss, whether, whatever, anything, you're going to go through some type of grieving process. So I think in understanding the grieving process, it'd be kind of good just to do a quick run through of the stages because it'll end up tying into what we end up seeing as signs of not taking care of ourselves.
Okay.
So there's the basic Kubler-Ross 5-stage model of grief, which includes denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Then there's an expanded 7-stage model, which includes testing as the first stage. Then it continues on denial, anger, bargaining, depression. Then it also inserts testing before you get to the final stage of acceptance. Then I did some more research and I found a model set forth by Jay Wright, and I really enjoyed this one because it was very thorough. It kind of expounds on the 7-stage, but it doesn't get too complicated, but it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So the first stage is a combination of shock and denial, right?
Okay.
Second stage, pain and guilt. Third stage, anger and bargaining. Fourth stage, depression, reflection, and loneliness, which is huge. And I think where a lot of what we see as the signs of not taking ourselves fall within that particular stage.
Okay.
5, the upward turn. 6, reconstruction and working through. And then 7, acceptance and hope. And what we need to understand, especially when it comes to taking care of ourselves, these stages, this is not a linear process. This is not something, oh, well, I'm in stage 3, so now I'm going to go to stage 4. No, you might regress. Some people skip entire stages. It just really is dependent on your resiliency. It's dependent on your support system. And it's dependent on your ability to utilize coping skills and the resources that you have with you. So please understand that the grieving process is really individual. Nobody is ever going to experience the grieving process exactly like another person. It's almost like a thumbprint or a fingerprint. It's going to be very unique to the person. Just because the grieving process, it involves emotions. It involves our mental health. It involves our physical health. So as we get into some of the signs, right? So some of those signs, again, where we see them mostly in that 4th stage, depression, reflection, and loneliness. You might see things like either weight gain or weight loss, depending on, again, the person that you are. I'm the type of person where here he comes. Depending on
during the conversation.
Oh yeah. Depending on where I'm at, I might overeat or I might just have absolutely no appetite. But again, that's going to be very, very dependent. You're going to see people who just completely, they withdraw. They're not taking care of themselves. Mm-hmm. You might see women who would come into the office, just looking completely hooked up, looking like a hot mess. And I remember you were saying that, those are those observations when you said that you pick up on things when people aren't taking care of themselves. Those are those observations that you make, like, hold on, honey, you were getting your hair done every week. What, now you're just you're pulling it back into what I like to call the pony tip. It's not even a ponytail at that point. It's a pony tip. And I use a lot of, I tend to use humor as a way to communicate.
Absolutely.
As a way to communicate myself, but in no way am I making light of the situation. Mm-hmm. You're going to see people who maybe used to be very social, going out all the time, engaging in activities, just again, that withdrawn, that loneliness, that I'm really not feeling it. Increased sleep or loss of sleep. So those are really some of the things that you're going to begin to notice. Some people, their hygiene habits completely go astray.
Wow.
They're not bathing for days on end, and they're just, I'm calling out of work, not going to any family functions, not wanting anyone around. These are all signs, because those are things that ultimately they're part of our overall self-care. Self-care isn't always getting mani-pedis and massages.
Right.
Now, self-care could be taking a hot bubble bath with, some candles and some quiet music. Anything that's really focusing on yourself. Self-care can be working out, doing yoga, meditating, praying, reading your word. Those are all self-care activities because they are things where you are investing in yourself. So once you stop investing in yourself, that's when you notice that your self-care is taking a hit.
Okay. I just want to sneak a part two to that question in there, because as you were talking, I thought about it. Can it also be because I think when I first went through the grieving process, I didn't neglect myself. I think I did, how can I put it? I covered up. In other words, I continued to stay busy. I was just like project after project. I didn't want to have time to think about it because I had that fear of if I sat down and thought about Brian, I would just sink into this dark hole. So instead, I was just on super turbo mode. I mean, would that still be considered of a way of not really take? Because when I think about it, I don't think I was actually taking good care of myself by doing that.
You're right. You're absolutely right. In fact, I even cover this a little bit further down in our questioning, but it's not grieving well.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right? It's not grieving well. We have to allow ourselves the process of grieving. So in that, if we look at the stages, that's more of your denial stage.
Denial. Okay.
You did not necessarily want to, and there's so many things that encompass the bereavement process, right? And I'll make sure I try to do as well as I can to really get through this, because when I really started digging through this, I was digging through this.
Yeah.
But it's really in that kind of shock and denial. And I remember like you were right back to work. You were doing, and everyone's like, "What are you doing here?" I remember that.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, you want to dive into something, but it's in fact, that kind of leads into our next question regarding barriers, right? You becoming preoccupied with other things, or maybe here's another thing that I've seen some people engage in doing. When they suffer the loss of the child, they overcompensate by focusing on another child.
Okay.
Or other family members, or just to fill that need to be needed.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So they do. They dive themselves and they focus on all of these other things, so that again, they don't have to feel and get through some of these other stages of the depression, the loneliness, the emptiness, things that you do feel during the grieving process.
Okay. So, and I apologize with that question. Let us into
question
two.
Perfect. You're good.
Question two is, what are some of the common barriers to self-care while you're grieving?
I think that's where we tend to find ourselves, we get stuck, right? And this is where possibly sometimes the more persistent grieving comes in. But a lot of times we become saturated in our emotional and physical symptoms. That depression stage is a pain. It's big. And if we allow, it's natural, right? There are some amounts of depression that are going to come along with bereavement. Loneliness, I mean, it's a loss. So there's an emptiness, there's a void now that has been left behind by the loss of the person. So you have to understand that some symptoms of depression are going to manifest. It's more situational depression rather than a diagnosable clinical depression. Okay. Now, here's the thing, and here's where you have to be very careful, and this can become a barrier too. If you have underlying mental health issues, pre-existing, if you dealt with depression and anxiety before, it could become really intensified during the bereavement process. Okay. And so this can become a barrier to self-care. And here's the thing, if you weren't taking care of your mental health before, yeah, you're kind of screwed on this one. Yeah. Because you're really not going to want to take care of yourself now and take care of your mental health symptoms. So I think underlying mental health symptoms can very often be a barrier, because they really present themselves during this time, and almost, I mean, it's like hitting a brick wall.
Hmm.
It's like hitting a brick wall. So if you weren't taking care of yourself, and if you weren't treating your mental health symptoms before, and then you suffer a loss, it's going to be a huge barrier to self-care, because now it's just exacerbated those symptoms.
Right. Okay.
Another thing I found, people kind of patronizing or placating to your grief. And what I mean by that, the usual attempts at trying to console you. Oh, they're in a better place now. Oh, they're not suffering anymore. Oh, I know how you feel. Honey, no, you don't. Even if
We
you
actually talked
feel,
about that. We talk about that a lot in the group, because I think a lot of the women and men that are part of the group have experienced some of those things.
yes.
I was sharing with someone just recently how my husband, right after Brian died, he went into the store and a friend of his he saw, and his friend said to him, "Oh, at least you have two other children."
Woo.
And I tried to explain to him that I don't think he said it to be facetious. He just
No.
didn't know what to say. And that's
Yeah.
the problem. I feel like people should just not say anything. I would appreciate a hug
You're right.
other than, rather than,
Girl, you took the words out of my mouth.
yeah, rather than a remark like that, like
Yes.
insignificant. I mean, a remark like that is just like saying he was insignificant. He could be replaced with someone else, and that's not the case. But
It's not. And I think it's a matter of approaching somebody who's lost somebody is an awkward situation.
yeah, it
So
is.
we come up with all these little nuances and phrases to attempt to console somebody, but all it is causing that person to feel like, oh, should I not be grieving? It's like, you mean, should I not be feeling this way? Is what I'm feeling abnormal? So now they're questioning the way they're grieving.
Yeah,
Now also, and it's again, like you said, they're not doing it maliciously or out of insensitivity. It's literally not knowing what to say in the moment.
I know what to say. Yeah, yeah,
And if there's anybody listening, listen, please don't ever say anything like that. Just be there for the person.
yeah,
Just be there. Your presence is what's going to be appreciated in the end. Just you being there to listen to stories that they want to tell, to share stories that, anything. But the placating and the patronizing the grief is just not healthy, and it's going to be a barrier, because then the person who's grieving is going to wonder, like, maybe I shouldn't be. And then my next point, in terms of it being a barrier, is it causes them not to grieve well,
yeah,
because now they're skipping a whole bunch of processes, not knowing what to do, not knowing what to say, not knowing where to go, and not knowing how to feel. And so now you're stuck in your grief.
mm-hmm.
So, and I know people don't mean ill by it, but it's not necessarily helpful.
Yeah,
Um, and then and I would be very careful too, in terms of now sharing your story with others, and in terms of providing hope for another person is one thing. And I think it's very healthy. But I think some people do it to kind of trauma share.
mm-hmm.
And then there's like a comparison that starts going on. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this in any of your groups, like,
I
oh,
mean,
the loss of my child was worse than yours. It's not about that.
right, right,
It's not about that. And so I think in those cases, you have to be very careful with that too. Because again, people mean well, but then if that person who is sharing their process with you hasn't necessarily gone through the grieving process well, it could become toxic.
yeah. I know I've been in situations where I've met someone or someone's recommended someone to me because I've lost a child. And, their questions to me is, and I'm honest with them, I don't have the answers. What you're going through, yes, I've lost a child. Yes, we have something in common, but your processing of the whole situation, your grief journey is going to be totally different than mine. There's no way I can, I'll listen. Just like you said, I'll listen. I'll be
Mhm.
for you. Like in my group, in my group, it's about celebrating the children too. You
Yeah.
know, so I try to focus on that. I try to recognize everybody's birthday when it's time. You know, I, that's what I think it should be about because, like you said, everyone grieves differently. I'm not a professional clinician, so I can't advise you. I can tell you, you know, if you're feeling that bad, then maybe you should seek help. Maybe you should talk to someone professional. But like you said, you get a lot of people who don't have the knowledge and they'll say things. One of my group members went through a person telling her, you should be over your grief by now.
Oh. Mm.
And I'm like, how dare that person, number one? There's
Yeah.
no timetable. And like you said, everyone is different. And you to tell someone that you know, you're right. And another person could question themselves. Well, should I be done grieving? You know, you
Yeah.
love children. Love is eternal.
Exactly.
How do you put a timetable on how long it's going to take me to? Because honestly, my belief is for when you lose a child, yes, you grieve. Yes, you want to work through the grief, but
Hmm.
you have to incorporate that into your life because your life changes. You're without that child and
Correct.
without that love.
Yeah.
So there's some lifestyle change, some your life changes, and you have to find out how I'm going to move on, how I'm going to go forward in life. Not grieve, be over it, don't talk about it no more.
Right.
That's the
Right.
wrong. That's
That
the
does not exist.
yeah.
And
But
that itself, again, it's people putting out these, these attempts to, or even criticisms of the person
right,
grieving, and it causes a barrier. It's a major barrier to them being able to grieve well.
yeah. Um, Next question. What
Mhm.
can grief do to you physically? We know mentally. We always think mentally when we're talking about grief, but let's talk about physically what it does to you.
So here's what I wanted to do. In order to understand grief physically, we have to kind of go through the emotionality of the grief, because what happens is it's the emotionality that spurs on, the physical symptoms, because ultimately that's stress in our body.
Mhm.
Our body is literally going through a stressful event, and so those physical symptoms are a result of the stress.
Okay.
So in order to understand the physical symptoms, we have to understand also the emotionality that comes with that, the emotional symptoms. So there's the numbness, right, of that whole shock and denial stage, attempts to detach from the pain, not even, all attempts to avoid it, kind of like what you did,
Yeah.
in terms of the work, throwing yourself back, doing these things and those are attempts to avoid that grieving process, because you want to be numb, or you already feel numb because of the shock of the event. There's the sadness and the yearning, missing the person's presence in your life. That is an overwhelming sadness. And that right there will cause the physical symptoms. Relief and guilt. This is a huge one, because people don't really understand that there is relief, both relief and guilt in some situations. If the child, for example, was going through cancer treatments,
Mhm.
understanding that, well, now they don't have to suffer through that pain. If there was some type of persistent physical illness where they were in constant pain, and is it natural to feel some relief? Yeah, actually it is. And not just with children, but with, parents who might be aging, anyone who, basically anybody who has been dealing with a life altering, physically paining illness. There are some senses of relief knowing that they don't have to go through that anymore.
Yeah.
Then you have the guilt, right? The survivor's guilt. The constant questioning of yourself. What could I have done if I had just said this, or if I had just gone there, if I hadn't gone to the store first, or, there's all of those things where you begin to question what could you have done differently to prevent it from happening.
Yeah.
That's going to manifest itself physically. The big one, anxiety, worry, and fear.
Mm.
Anybody who has lost a child, especially to a traumatic event, that is eventually, it could very well possibly cause some vicarious trauma. Okay. And this is where you begin to fear if the same thing is going to happen to you or somebody else that you love. Why are you laughing, Shannon?
It's funny you mentioned that because with Brian, for those in the audience that don't know, my son was killed in a car accident. And I laugh because after he passed away, I was paranoid about driving in a car.
Exactly.
And if I was in a car and somebody was driving fast, my nerves, like my husband he's from New York, so he's an aggressive driver.
Right.
He's from the Bronx. He's a very aggressive driver. And after Brian passed, I mean, if he went over 35, I was just a wreck. And he'd be like, I'm driving. I'm like, but I just, and I felt like I didn't want us to die in a car accident. Like I'm saying it. I didn't want to die in a car accident like Brian did. And
Right.
I dealt with that for a long time. I was nervous about driving. My husband was taking me everywhere. I wouldn't drive. And I'm a late learner. I didn't get my driver license until I was 47 years old.
Okay.
And after his death, it was like I didn't want to drive anywhere.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be a passenger with anyone that I didn't know. Seat belts was huge for me. You would not get in my car like my sister. She would get I'm in the back seat. No, you got to put a seat belt on. Because out of all the people in the car, it was 4 people in the car with my son. He was the only one that didn't have a seat belt on.
Right.
So it's all of those little things that happened to him, all of a sudden, it just made me fearful. So that's why I was laughing when you mentioned that. I'm like, wow, I never even honestly talked to anyone and relayed those feelings other than my husband. But yeah, I did go through that. I did not want to be in a car, especially if I didn't know who you were, or how you drive. So
Right.
I can relate to that, definitely.
Yeah, and that's that vicarious trauma piece, because you may not have directly experienced the event, but you experienced it through his death. And so now it's causing you to have all these questions, to have all this, these fears and this paranoia. And, I don't know if you felt, heightened levels of anxiety, especially being in a car, and again, those manifest physical symptoms, very, very much so. One thing I do want to touch on regarding this anxiety piece, a lot of times anxiety that comes as a result of a traumatic event like this, and you didn't have pre-existing anxiety, be careful with trying to attempt to treat it with anti-anxiety meds.
Yeah, I'm a non-med person.
Yeah. Listen, I believe each person, there's some people that need meds, there's some people that don't. I mean, it's really independent. But when you begin to have symptoms of anxiety based on something like this, where you're going through the loss of a loved one or a child, be careful with taking the anti-anxiety meds, because they might not necessarily work, because of the fact that this isn't some kind of anxiety disorder. It's the result of a situation.
Okay.
So it's really just your body and your mind and your spirit even going through the grieving process. And you have to be able to give yourself time to work through that without just trying to stifle the symptoms with medication. A lot of people, I don't know if you went back to work. When you went back to work, Shannon, did you ever feel like a loss of concentration, kind of foggy, you're there, but you're not there type of situation?
I did, because I dealt with, when I got back to work, and hindsight, I know I went back too soon. But
Sure.
It was like I had to keep busy. But you're right. When I was at work, I really didn't have the focus that I should have had.
Yeah.
And I think,
You were there, like I said, you were there, but you weren't there.
right, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and then it was honestly, it was like me looking around, like, what are people thinking?
hmm
You
Right.
know,
You feel like all eyes are on you.
yeah, and it's like I know people were concerned, but I just wanted to go back to work and not have the Brian, you know what I mean? I just
Right.
wanted to go to work. But when I went to work, I had those that came up to me, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I knew I was going to get that." Then the funny thing is I had the ones that would see me and go to opposite direction.
Hmm.
And
Oh, yeah.
later I found out from a few of them it was because the fact that I lost a child, they
Yeah.
they didn't know what to do or what to say, and they avoided me.
Wow.
At first, I took it like I just lost my child, and you're not gonna even
How insensitive.
recognize it or say
Right.
something. But afterwards, I've had conversations with those same people, and they've said, "I just was so scared to be around you because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. I didn't know what to say." And I understood it after that.
Sure.
But people, it's so many different things you experience when it comes to your grief and other people. And
hmm
I wanted to have this conversation with you because I can look at both sides of it. I can know that you're not facetious, but other people, they take it to heart.
Right.
And
And they take it personal. Yeah.
yeah, and it can, like you said, it can they can grieve unhealthy, like you said, because they're not understanding how you could say this or how you can treat me this way, and I just lost my child. So I did, and for a long time when I went back to work, it was that foggy feeling, that unconcentrated feeling, because in the back of my mind, I still was so early in the grief process. And when I'm back at work, all my mind was Brian. And
Yeah.
there were a few times one of my friends had to come in the bathroom because I had a meltdown.
Yeah.
She saw me get up from my desk. She saw my face and followed me in the bathroom, and I just lost. And it was like, I knew at that moment, I was like, why am I here? I
hmm
still, but I just insisted on I had to be at work.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And it's very difficult because again, you feel like, well, if I just, and it's funny because we think it's self-care, right? We
Mm,
think it's self-care, but oh, if I just take my mind off of things, I get motivated, I can make myself up, go to work, and but if you're doing it too soon, it can, again, that's that barrier part.
yeah,
It can become a barrier to our grieving process and just kind of prolong it even more.
right. Absolutely.
Another one of the emotional, and this is a very, very common one, anger. We
Mm,
experience a lot of anger.
mhm.
Um, Anger with our own selves, anger at the person who actually passed, because you're like, how could you do that? You know better. All of these things. Of course, we love them and we're upset,
Yeah,
but we go through these anger outbursts as well.
yeah.
Anger, at the people who might have been around them, at the doctors for not doing enough. And again, I say all of these emotions so that we understand what our physical symptoms become. And this is where I get into the physical part. Emotions are draining.
Mm,
Emotions take a toll on our body. Emotions are stressful.
mm,
And so we're going to experience it because of all these emotions that I've listed. We're going to experience loss of energy. We're going to have fatigue. We're going to have body aches and pains. I mean, just all over. I'm the kind of person where anytime I feel stress, it's either right here in my neck and shoulders or it's in my lower back. And I don't, and it has nothing to do with what I did or any kind of, it's nothing but stress. And so when we begin to experience all these emotions, it drains our body. It lowers our immune system. So
mm,
we become sick easier. Our sleeping patterns suffer.
Minded.
Yes, this is a huge one. Either we're oversleeping or we can't sleep.
Hmm.
And when we're sleeping, we're having nightmares. So our sleep is affected, our appetite is affected. And these are some of the signs that we start seeing too. We have either the excessive eating and weight gain, or no appetite whatsoever, and we're losing weight. Some people experience nausea, especially if you have anxiety, you might have a lot of nausea, diarrhea. I mean, all of these things, it kills us. With the anxiety, with the anger, all the headaches.
Mm.
Headaches are huge. Anytime I've gone through the loss of somebody, headaches are my big signal.
Mm.
I'm just experiencing an overload of emotion. Anywhere from, that sadness to, again, that anxiety, that worry and the fear, that anger, manifest very much. Headaches are a huge one.
Okay.
So these are, again, these fall under that signs, but it just goes to show us that our emotions are real.
Yeah.
To think that this is not an emotional process is denying ourselves, again, the ability to grieve well. We have to understand that our emotions are going to manifest in our body physically, and we have to understand how they manifest in order to be able, you're getting all of a sudden unexplained nausea when you've never had any gastrointestinal issues before.
Mm.
Well, it could be a result of some type of emotional process that you might be stuck in.
Yeah, true.
I've had a lot of people who have come through therapy and they have all of these physical symptoms, but the doctors can't diagnose anything.
Mm.
It's because they are stuck in some type of emotion that has been caused by some type of traumatic event, and they never worked through that. So if you're not working through your grieving process properly, your body is going to let you know.
Okay.
It will let you know, definitely.
Okay. Now, is it true that some people develop PTSD after an unexpected death of a loved one? I've read and heard that some people experience PTSD, excuse me. So talk about that.
Yes, especially if this was an unexpected traumatic event. PTSD usually doesn't necessarily um, mean that you're focusing on the actual death as much as the event. So, and this is where, even in our fifth question, in terms of the complicated grief disorder, there's a difference. The PTSD is going to be assigned to the actual event. The complicated grief is going to be assigned to the person.
So when you say event, so
Mm-hmm.
I'll use myself as an example.
Mm-hmm.
It develops from me concentrating on the actual car accident and not so much Brian.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So that's where you're going to get typical signs of PTSD, avoiding certain places,
Mm.
any kind of avoidance of the situation. Example, you started getting scared of going in a car.
Mm. Okay.
Again, that could be if you're not, now understand, in terms of PTSD, you have to be manifesting several symptoms in order for it to be diagnosed as PTSD. Right. Otherwise, it's just the typical grieving process.
Right.
But things like, re-experiencing the event, intrusive thoughts about it, flashbacks, even just, like when you got the call, things that have to do with the actual event, ruminating on the event, at just unexpected times, while you're at work, while you're at school, while you're at some type of family function. Now there's a hypervigilance too. That's another symptom of PTSD. Being super careful, being overly aware, being startled with everything. I'm sure, when you were in the car, even shortly after, I couldn't imagine you must have been clutching onto your seat.
Yes. That
Yeah.
was me.
Yeah. So that's all. And understand, anything up to 30 days after the actual event is more or less called acute stress disorder. Anything that persists on after that is more diagnosable to PTSD.
Okay. Because I think when we think about PTSD, most people think military,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
servicemen. They don't realize that this is a disorder that you can experience. We always, from what I understand, we always think it's a soldier that's been in Iraq, a soldier that's been through some type of, you know, military trauma, so to say. And that's what
Mhm.
I think a lot of people related to, not realizing that it can be brought on from grief too.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. And again, especially when it is the result of a traumatic event.
Yeah.
Death in and of itself is traumatic,
Hmm.
you know, but if the death occurred as the result of a traumatic event, it's like double the trauma, you know. So in those cases, you are definitely more likely to develop either acute stress disorder or PTSD as a result.
Okay. Now, you mentioned complicated grief disorder. Can you explain what is complicated grief disorder?
Yes. So, again, I actually really enjoyed researching for this particular discussion because I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm always trying to learn something new.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Especially in my profession, we got to keep up. Um,
absolutely.
so when I researched complicated grief disorder in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, basically what we use to make diagnoses. Um, it's not listed as complicated grief disorder. It's persistent complex bereavement disorder. So this is not yet what the DSM would consider an actual diagnosis. It's something that's actually it's an area of further study. It's more towards the back of the book that we might find in a revised version going forward.
Gotcha.
So it does look like something that they will most likely put in there because of the fact that we are finding this so much more.
Okay.
And I hope you don't mind, and I've never used your name, but I have often used your situation with Brian when I was speaking with clients in terms of, and I know you might not necessarily feel like you grieved Brian well, but when I look at it, from my perspective, you did an amazing job, Shannon.
Thank you.
I mean, amazing. So I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but 2 months after Brian passed, I had a cousin who was killed in a car accident.
Mm,
To almost 2 months to the day. Um, my aunt did not deal well.
mm.
I mean, it was bad. It was really bad. She stopped going out. She stopped, and again, that's part of the normal grieving process. However, with complicated grief disorder or persistent complex bereavement disorder, if it's happening for longer than 12 months and it's affecting you socially, occupationally, in your relationships, if you're in school, educationally, if it's limiting the kind of function that you're having in everyday life beyond 12 months afterwards,
Mhm.
most likely you're experiencing persistent complex bereavement disorder.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is going to be much like regular grieving, only you are stuck. We were friends on Facebook, and that's how I kept in communication with her. And almost all her posts were about my cousin Johnny. Almost all of them.
Wow.
She had another daughter. She had my cousin Casey, and you wouldn't see anything on her. You wouldn't see anything about Casey. Very rarely. I think when Casey got married was like the first time I had seen her in years post up something.
Mhm.
And eventually, I mean, she just went, and you could tell that she wasn't going out and she wasn't doing anything because there were people posting on her page, "Hey, Kathy, I haven't seen you in a long time. I hope you're okay."
Wow.
"Hey, Kathy, hope you're doing well." I remember she contacted my brother one time because she finally started giving away Johnny's things after, that was 2000, after about 2-3 years.
Wow.
It took her a few years to start, actually releasing some of his things. And it was only because her therapist, I guess, had suggested she leave Rochester
Mm.
because she was so stuck in her process. And her he suggested that she move closer to her daughter,
Okay.
so that she could begin to kind of refocus herself a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I'll never forget, in 2019, I was sitting at my mom's table. It was maybe October-ish. And my mom looked at me, she goes, I haven't seen anything about your aunt lately. I wonder how she's doing. Shannon, we looked on her page, she had passed away.
Oh no.
Nobody ever knew. But up until her dying day, excessive posting about John. Like that's all you saw.
Wow.
And it was almost like she really couldn't live without him.
Wow.
You
That
know?
that makes me sad because um I know a few people that have gone that route, you
Yeah.
know, just can't. And I don't pass judgment. I don't know because I know how my heart broke. And in the beginning with me it was more of God, why?
Yeah.
Why me?
Yeah.
I've given my life to you. I'm a good person. I'm a sinner like everyone else. We're all sinners, saved
Right.
by grace. But I felt like I was living my life right, and I didn't understand how you could. It was about me,
Right.
and I had to get past that me stage. Why me? And
Mhm.
and, and try to understand it. It was with me. It was more spiritual. Reading
Yeah.
my word. Closing up in the room and talking to God. I mean, not everyone will do that or has a relationship with God. Because when, in the support group, it's not, based on religion. But for me, that's what got me through. And
Yeah.
I often think if I didn't have God in my life, where would I be? Would I
Yeah.
would have I turned to drinking? Would I have
Yeah.
turned to something to soothe the pain? So when I hear about someone that they couldn't get past it, they started having mental issues or they started drinking or God forbid they wind up just giving up and dying.
Mhm.
I don't say I understand it, but I know that that could have been me
Yeah.
because
You
it,
know,
it's it's
and
it's
I would never say, knowing my aunt's history and the things that she, even before Johnny's death, the things that this woman went through. I mean, she was an incredibly strong woman. Oh, I mean, absolutely amazing, beautiful, vibrant. And she went through a lot. She went through a lot even before Johnny's death. And I think that was just like, for her, it was like the straw that broke the camel's back.
and
Um, and I,
people don't realize, Janine, it is a different
oh,
thing. Now I lost my mother and my mom was my heart
mhm,
and it crushed me. Um and just real quick, my mom that passed right before Brian was actually my grandmother who raised me. But
mhm,
it was like I was like devastated.
yeah,
Before that, right after that, my real mother, she developed ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease,
yeah, yeah,
and she suffered horribly to the
mm,
end, where she understood everything around her but could not have any use of her body.
wow,
And it's funny you mentioned what you did earlier because I always after that was like, oh my God, am I going to get it? You
mhm.
start thinking like that.
You
But
do, you
it
do,
when Brian died, I tell anybody, a lot of people feel like grief is grief. It's
hmm,
so different when it's a child.
yeah,
I when I lost my mother, it hurt me. But when I lost Brian,
oh,
it is a undescribable pain.
yeah,
I I, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And it is a difference. There is a difference in the level of pain when you lose a child as opposed to
definitely.
a mother, a brother, a sister. Yes, it all hurts, but it's just
It's
different.
just different.
And
It's
if you
just different.
never lost a child, you'll never understand that. And I don't want you to have to understand that because
Yeah, right, right.
it's devastating. And I can see it, like you talk about your aunt, she's a strong woman, she's been through a lot, but losing a child could just, I don't care how strong you is, it could take you down.
It
It
can.
can break you down. and
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 I remember her putting up postings of, because from what I mean, again, I could only see what was going on Facebook, but it looked like, people began criticizing her for, kind of perseverating and ruminating on it. And I don't think I could ever, even if she was stuck in, this persistent complex bereavement, I could never criticize anybody for it because, like you said, it's a pain unspeakable.
unspeakable. It is.
Unspeakable,
I think, we have groups for parents that are grieving, groups for grieving in general, how to deal with loss. We need to have education on how to deal with people that are grieving. We need
Yeah.
to, there needs to be some education out there to help people understand how to be sensitive, and like you said, not criticize, and how you can be a help to someone,
Right.
as opposed to, criticizing how they're grieving. You're
Yeah.
not going through it, so you don't have that right to criticize.
Yeah. And when it comes to the persistent complex bereavement, again, there are symptoms that are typical of grieving, but it's like grieving times 10, you
Intensify.
know, it
Yeah.
intensified. That sorrow and the emotional pain, this constant preoccupation with the death of the loved one, um, reactive distress to the death, difficulty accepting that they're gone. You can't think of anything positive, any kind of positive reminiscing, um, of avoiding any reminders, excessive avoiding of any reminders of the person whatsoever.
Mhm.
There's just, I mean, like I said, symptoms times 10.
Yeah.
Feeling like life is no longer has any kind of meaning without them. Um, you have now a diminished sense of self. You have no idea of who you are. Your identity is completely gone. And again, these aren't even all of them. I was just handpicking the ones that I saw most
Right.
of. I've seen reoccurring the most. Difficulty pursuing your own interests. Planning for the future. That guilt. That survivor's guilt. Like,
Mhm.
why should I go on with my life anymore?
Yeah.
It's not fair. And again, when these affect all of the areas of your life, or even one majorly for over 12 months rather, you might want to question whether you're now in this complex bereavement.
Right. Right. And I'm sure you agree with me. I recommend to anyone in the audience, anyone experiencing any type of grief, if you get to that point where you question, you know, how am I doing okay, or am I doing the right thing, seek professional help. I think we and I'm gonna be explicit, we as African American women, Latino women, we tend to feel, um I don't need to see, we I don't need to see a psychiatrist, I got this. And women that are strong, they feel
Hmm.
like, I'm a strong Black woman, or I'm a strong,
Right.
and I don't need to see a psychiatrist. There's nothing wrong with seeking help. I
Okay.
want people to realize there's nothing wrong with seeking help. It doesn't make you any less stronger. If anything, it'll make you stronger. So I do encourage women out there, men too. I'm not going to just say women. If you feel like you don't have a grasp on it, if you feel like you're spinning out of control, always seek help.
Yes.
Um, this has been fun, and our hour is almost up. I'm gonna get the last question. This is really, really great. I gotta have you back. We gotta find another topic and have you back, because this has
Oh,
been,
that's fine.
and I'm hoping the audience is really getting something from this conversation. It's helping me. It's helping me understand some of the things I went through. When I look back, because it's been, wow, I can't believe it's been going on 8 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
8 years.
Isn't
Wow.
that crazy? I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. So I think the next question, after all that we've talked about, we
Mhm.
do understand why it's important, the importance of self care.
Yeah.
I think you've covered that very well. But talk to us briefly about beginning the self care process during your grieving. What are some of the steps?
Yeah. It's really baby steps.
Hmm.
It's baby steps. Because we're going to even just kind of touching on that importance of self-care piece, again, you're going to experience some of it, not taking care of yourself, your hygiene, your appearance, all that stuff. You're going to experience some of that to an extent, again, because you're going through the emotions. The emotions are draining. You don't have the energy, things like that. But you got to start slowly. Rome was not built in a day, even
Hmm.
though it feels like, life was taken from you in a heart and, in less than a heartbeat. You have to learn how to come back slowly.
Hmm.
Trying and perfect example of what you provided, trying to do it too much too soon can be a barrier for you really going through your grieving process well. You know, Unfortunately, and this is one thing that I really don't necessarily agree on in terms of places of employment. I don't think they give us enough bereavement time. When I lost my father, I think the company only allowed 3 days.
Yeah, my company, 3 days, 5 days if you have to travel out of town,
And I'm just like, what is that?
and that's nothing.
That's
And
nothing.
I can
That's
say,
absolutely nothing. You're still in the shock of the
yeah,
whole thing.
yeah,
In
I
3 days, most of the time, the services haven't even begun.
I know.
So it's
It
like,
took
what is
me
three
more
days
than
going
3
to do?
days. Nothing, nothing. I
That's
know. I mean, I can say my job was definitely understanding. They were willing to give me more time. I chose to go back,
yeah,
but you're right. 3 days is ridiculous.
it is.
It
Um,
is.
so I think that there's, systemically, we have to understand that, we're going to end up getting pushed back in some cases sooner than we're ready to be.
Hmm.
But again, it takes understanding, first of all, understanding yourself, understanding the ways you kind of let yourself go during your grieving process.
Hmm.
What are the things that you're no longer doing? Um, Taking the small steps to get back there gradually. If you were, I don't know, on a bowling team and you went every week, okay, let's not get right back on the team. Okay. Maybe you might take, a Saturday out of the month and just go to the bowling alley or something
Right.
small.
Yeah.
Don't throw yourself right back into everything because it could be another shock to your system and it might not be all that healthy. So you have to understand the baby steps that you need to take. Another part in terms of the self-care process, I think that still continuing to celebrate the person.
Yeah. I'm I believe I'm big on that. I'm big on that. And
Yes.
I try to say one of my group members experienced where people were like, stop talking about him. I say Brian's name every day in some
Yeah,
form or fashion, and I celebrate him in any chance that I can. You don't want to hear
yeah,
it? Then turn me off. But I'm going to celebrate my child. And in the
that's
group,
right.
I try to put up a post with the child's birthday, just like you do on Facebook. Why can't we celebrate them?
Yeah.
I love
I mean,
them.
he wasn't my child, but when I lost my father, I say Happy Father's Day. I say happy, and it's because he still has his Facebook page. So I'll go into messages and either I'll post on his wall
Uh,
or I'll go into messages. You
yeah.
know, and I think a lot of people, some people are afraid that they'll forget the person or they'll forget their voice. And I think sometimes we go through that. Oh my God, I don't remember what they sound like. I don't remember what they look like. But I feel like that's temporary because those types of memories are forever ingrained in us.
I hear
We are
Brian's
not
voice.
going to forget.
I know his face. I know. Oh my
Yes.
goodness. I'll never forget those things. I got upset when I got a new phone and I kept his voicemail, his last voicemail
Yep. I
and when
remember.
I got a new phone, I lost it, and I was so upset. But I said, you know what? That's okay. I can still hear Brian's voice. I still know what his voice sounds like. And I did worry
Exactly.
for a moment, in the early stages. Am I going to forget him? Am I going to forget his smile and this and that, but you don't. You
You
don't.
don't.
And it's like you mentioned celebrating them.
Yeah.
And I believe in celebrating a child because your love doesn't die when the child dies. Your love goes on. So if your love goes on, express that love. Celebrate the
Exactly.
child. Talk about them. Every blue moon, I'll put a post up about Brian. You don't
Mhm.
want to hear it, unfriend me and keep moving. Because I'm
Right.
celebrating my
But
child.
that's your way, and this is where you begin to grieve well. Are you still grieving? Yes. I don't think you ever,
I don't think you ever stop.
I don't think so. I,
I
I
don't think you
really
ever
don't.
stop. I think you get
You
better.
get better at it.
You get
That's
better.
what
There you
happens.
go. You get better at it. You've incorporated it into your life where it's a healthy thing instead of a non-healthy thing. But I don't think you ever. Because I'm not even gonna lie. 8 years later, I can be doing something, and all of a sudden, I get flooded with a memory, and the tears start. And I used to say, I thought I was past this, and then I had to get to the point where Shannon, you'll never be past it. Because I would beat
No,
myself up like I'm sitting here drooling and crying, and I thought I was over this. And no,
you're not.
no, I'm
You're
not.
not.
When I have those moments, it may sound crazy. I just embrace them. I just let it out. I just let it out because I'm gonna have them.
You
But
are. One
yeah,
of the one of the one of the best pieces of advice that I received when my father passed away was those memories are going to come at the most unexpected time.
gosh, yes,
It's okay. Cry, do whatever you got to do because it's going to happen.
it happened. Yep, you're
It's
absolutely
going to happen.
right.
And I'm a crier. Oh God, I'm a crier. Oh Lord. Like I'll be very transparent because you know how I am, Shannon.
Yes,
I'm stifling the tears this whole interview. Like because I'm a crier. I'm an empath. I have so much emotion. I feel other people's emotion. So
yeah,
it's and anything that I do, in remembering my father or any of my loved ones, I'm gonna cry. Doesn't mean I'm upset or overly sorrowful. It's just that's my catharsis. That's my cathartic
yeah.
process.
That's how
It's
you.
just through tears.
Yeah, your mic is going out a little bit. I didn't know.
Oh, can you still hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're still there. Yeah, but this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you taking the time out to talk with the group. You've given us so much to think about, and I just appreciate you. I appreciate you as a friend. I appreciate you. I just love you to death.
Oh, me too,
So
Jamie. Thank
thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much. We went over an hour, so that means this was a good show. So I would love to have you back at a later date. I'm trying to think of doing some type of panel discussion with some of my past guests.
Okay.
So I may reach out to you again and include you in that.
Of course.
But definitely thank you. So, with that being said, we're going to close out today. I hope everyone enjoyed the information, found the information helpful. And once again, if you're feeling distressed or need help, always look for professional help. And we're going to sign out right now. Everyone have a blessed evening, and I'll see you on the next show. Thank you. All right.
Bye bye.